Using task managers to record video ideas. So in the last couple of years, I've tried different approaches to making videos. I now also introduced different formats. This is the front format. I also have a rear format where I just film something with my phone in my hand. I also now have a code format, which means that I write something, usually on Twitter, and then I read it in order to basically also have a video. Then I plan to have maybe a podcast or one podcast in the future. And I also recently had this idea of a screenshot or a picture which would be on my notebook, and I would just record something improvised, basically compared to code which is kind of pre-written. Now all of these formats have their up and down sides, and over the years I went through basically iterating them, whether I should do them improvised or whether I should do them scripted. I also tried a couple of times reading something I already had written basically on screen, not on screen, but with basically this format, which then this leads then to a probably more precise video, but it also increases the time spent per video significantly, up to the point where I would spend probably multiple hours scripting a video. So this is what it usually took me to write a blog post on something. And the alternative would be that I would make video after video where I just spoke freely, but this only kind of works over the long term as you then become more proficient at speaking, such that the average video you output is not total garbage. Now, what I wanted to speak on is how to record now these ideas. And the question is now, how do you record these ideas for these different formats? Now, what I've used in the past is, first of all, I've used just a list in OneNote. The big benefit of this list is, and also the big benefit of establishing a list like this, is to decrease the negative aspect of the availability bias. So usually the availability bias is kind of the thing. Now this is actually not really, so the availability bias is not really getting over. It's not really the same thing what I try to explain. So usually the availability bias is when you come up with the things that are basically they're available. For example, if I want to take a few random examples that are things, then I would say the things that are in my visual field because they are kind of available. In terms of now the negative or the inversion of this is, or would be, is that if I try to record a video, and this is what I meant to express, if I try to record a video and I don't have any ideas, then there seems to be a negative feedback loop on me. So if I don't have any ideas but I want to make videos, then what am I even doing? But by making a list, one seems to, at least in my experience, tap into basically the brainstorming part of the mind that comes up with ideas less filtered. So one is able then to put down multiple ideas. So for example, a couple of years ago, I put down a couple of ideas for a podcast I did with a friend, and then I had idea after idea and after idea. And so I wrote down maybe 300 possible episodes, and then this list was there. And we just made a couple of these, and we went basically down this list, and so we had topics. And I don't know how, maybe my mind came up with these different filters, but once my brainstorming part of my mind turns on, then it seems to deliver ideas, and I also cannot really help myself the only way to really stop this is to just not write any ideas down, and then you eventually forget that this was kind of something you wanted to do. But if you have the possibility to record them, then this is kind of just free ideas, because I don't need to think about these. It's not like, oh yeah, I could do this, and maybe I've read this article on this, and so maybe if I combine them together, this could be something it is interesting to write or talk about. But it's much more like, okay, here's this idea, and here's another idea, and here is another idea. So by tapping into this and brainstorming and also separating these processes out, it seems to be beneficial to the overall basically process of then making these videos. But I often noticed that I just, whenever I wanted to record something, that I did not have them available. Now, what is also seemingly the case is that if I make these videos, if I pre-write them by writing tweets, for example, and then also just recording the tweets, then this kind of takes away from the creativity in the moment, because so it also takes away from somewhat of the constraint, of the pressure, because I just read. Of course, now reading is also somewhat complicated, especially if you want to do it without mistakes. So this is also quite an issue. In the beginning, I only would take one takes, for example, and sometimes it would take me 50 minutes to read one blog post. And so I just sat there for 50 minutes recording this. But let's go back to how to record these ideas. So first of all, I had these OneNote lists. Then eventually I put them into my task manager. The problem now is with the task manager is that if you have it in your task manager and you search for something, like you want to search for these different tasks, then you have all these different words that appear in the possible video ideas. And since these are ideas, since the ideas are of course an overlap with the things I do, I then have all of these things that are video ideas in my tasks appearing, and I could not really filter them out, at least in the task manager I use, which would be Microsoft Task Manager, or Microsoft To Do, I think it is called. So I recently, or in the last couple of months, I actually had two processes. The first one would be that I just wrote a tweet. Because if I could write a tweet, then it would already be the scripted thing, and if I would make videos improvising, then this would be the alternative way. I would just turn on the camera and speak on whatever that seems to be somewhat interesting that happened kind of in the last weeks. Now, the big downside to this is kind of the negative aspect of this, or of the averted availability bias, that if you don't have anything interesting, that it's like, oh, what am I even doing here? Who is ever going to listen to this? Who would be interested in this? And so on and so forth. But by outsourcing this, one can take these different roles. Saying, okay, these are ideas, I think these are interesting. And then one writes them down, and then the next role I can take then is, okay, and now just talk about these ideas because they are already written out. But by having all of this responsibility, and also maybe the posting responsibility right after, here, in one batch basically, then it's like, okay, if I post this right now and I also have this idea, is this even something I should post? So by basically separating these processes into different batched processes, where one does one thing multiple times, one does not think so much, at least in my case, about the other parts of the process, which obviously is turning out videos, which then maybe nobody is interested in. But that's then another question: is what am I making videos about, or are these videos of any interest? Now. And so these are kind of different questions, and one does not have to encounter all of these questions at once all the time when making videos. But then there is also this aspect, and this is now kind of this current format now. This is also the reason I now have these different formats, is that by just talking, I am kind of learning the skill of just talking. I talk about things I think that are interesting, and if I even make the constraint or basically have also the additional constraint of not stopping in between, then I have to keep on talking. I cannot just say, okay, this is bad, let's just stop. But by having to keep on talking, I also basically practice for real life. So if I make video after video after video, and let's say I make 10 videos like these where I talk for 20 minutes, then I also practice constantly, basically the art of speaking, at least in this case in English. Now, I also speak another language, but I don't currently make many videos in that other language, which also leads to less fluency in this other language, which is actually my native language, which is kind of sad. Nonetheless, and also seemingly obvious, I'm also not that proficient in English, which also, so it's kind of this thing where I could make better videos if I scripted them, and then they would already maybe find a better audience. But in the long term, it just takes me more time per unit of media, which I then publish. So in the long term, I'm trying to bet on me becoming better at speaking. So I'm basically taking away current viewership by making the videos worse by just speaking through them, improvised. But I bet on me becoming a better speaker and maybe also becoming more knowledgeable and learning things throughout my life, such that I then at any point in time can make a video that is more interesting, but also in real life, maybe in real conversation, engage people a little bit better compared to me just having to type out everything. This is also something I noticed whenever I have periods in which I just type things on Twitter, or sometimes I write a blog post, even though that seems in terms of time usage not that useful, because I can just make a video about the same thing, and then it takes maybe a fifth of the time, even though the video might not be better, and there might be multiple different dimensions or variables to this. So I then switched to Task Manager, but in terms of Task Manager, I had this problem with the search function. I previously used a Notion list, not a Notion list, but a OneNote list, and at least in the last couple of days, I've now also used again a list with video ideas. And this seems to mostly prevent me from saying, okay, what else is there that I can talk about? Also, if you just write out these different, or if you just have these different processes in your workflow, then it allows you, at least in my experience, to just separate yourself from the other roles you have in your one-man show, which is in this case me. And it allows you basically to not think about everything all at once, all the time. I don't actually really know what the future process would be, but what I can explain is the different formats I currently have planned and what the process therefore would be. Now, one big idea I have in terms of content production, and I try to basically implement in these different workflows, is that ideally a video flow of a given channel is attached to an actual flow in real life. So as I live through life, I experience different things. Out of these different things, there are things that might basically have interest. No, they might basically pass the interest filter such that I say, okay, these might be interesting. So they basically, and also the privacy filter, this is something I actually want to talk about. And so they might basically, from this timeline that is my life, go beyond this threshold, up or below which they would not be interesting enough or also too private enough, and they basically come out, and then I can turn them into videos. But as I continue life, basically the videos are just a part of the things I experience. So I basically generate new videos anyway, or new ideas anyway. The question is just whether I turn them or convert whatever I do into a video. So this idea of having a flow that is basically independent from content production, and that then the content production is just a function thereof, or the videos I turn out are just a function thereof, I think seems to make sense, because this allows me to not have to come up with something that I then just basically research in order to make a video about this, which also in terms of time usage allows me to just live the life I want to live and then turn out videos out from this timeline. Now a subdivision, or there are now several subdivisions of this. One is the screenshots I take on my phone, as well as on my notebook. If I have the screenshots on my phone, what I currently do for a new format which I have not made channels for, is that, so I have these screenshots, but also pictures, and all of the media I take, which is in picture form, this kind of via phone link on my notebook available. Then I open up phone link, and then I can voice over via the microphone I'm currently using. I can voice over, and whenever I therefore find something interesting that I can make a screenshot, this could be a change in, I don't know, a change in settings on my smart routine, for example, which I have running with these smart bulbs here, or this could be a change in a habit, and this could be a change in a recipe I made on my FitnessPal, and then I already have this, and I document this for myself, but also maybe for potential other people who are interested, and I just document this change I already have made anyway. I just document it by first taking a screenshot, and then I document it by basically overlaying my voice, and that's then a video. So this would be an example of one workflow. The next workflow is that I just, whenever I have a couple of ideas, either in my mind or already written down, and these videos are not constrained by showing something, or don't, so I don't need to have something show up, or I don't need specific graphs. Sometimes I have actually kind of a Dyna 4. I don't know if this is a normal sheet of paper with a transparent foil on it, and then I can write on this with non-permanent marker, which then allows sometimes visualization. But I also noticed that this takes away time, and this is also not available in real life, so this is kind of the real life talking format. And so I rely here on either ideas I have anyway, when I basically make time for then recording all of the ideas that are on my mind that are suitable for this format. So this would be the second workflow, basically just emptying my mind out of all of the ideas, or emptying a certain list, which is then basically a sub or a derivative of the mind over time. Not a derivative, maybe it is a derivative, but yeah, well, the ideas come from my mind and I just write them down over time, and so it might be either from, the ideas collect over time anyway, so it doesn't matter in terms of defining this, where they then come from. Basically from historic records, one could say, but in terms of my mind, I can still remember these records. So I then have this front format, I then have the rear format, where I usually just discuss changes I made to my apartment, because I currently don't go around and film something random. So this is mostly the rear format. Sometimes nutrition, and look, this is my kitchen. Who would be interested in something like this? I don't know. So the next format then is code, which are basically, and out of all of these formats I have a short version and a long version. The short version usually goes up to 1 minute in terms of video length, and in terms of writing length or text length, this is then what it could result in video length. So I would have to kind of go from there if this is a word. So the short version of code, which is written things, is basically a tweet. The long version would be a blog post. This also could be maybe a book, but currently I don't write books, so I also don't have to make audio versions and video versions of books. And also a book is quite a little bit of a time investment, whereas if I make a couple of 100 videos or 100 videos instead, then also I spread myself a little bit further in terms of the potential audience. Well, a book, in other words, seems to be a bigger risk, maybe also a bigger reward, but well. So I have this code format. I also then have this new format which I call visual, where I just document screenshots or voice-over screenshots, but also improvised. The code format would be the only thing that is written. I also have to record the code format, and currently I just don't write tweets, which is mostly due to the fact that I try to avoid social media. There seems to be not a very good way where I can have multiple accounts set up and then tweet to these multiple accounts, unless I previously have all of these tweets written out and then I copy them basically to maybe Twitter, and in Twitter itself you can have multiple accounts logged in, but then I have more channels than the accounts I can have logged in, so I need to use multiple browsers. And there are also social media schedulers available. So these are basically websites where you then can post to another, but these often cost money, so I cannot set them up for all of my different channels, which led mostly to me just switching to another format. Because what would I say in a tweet? I would sometimes have a picture, or it would just be words. If it is just words, then I can also maybe use this format. Of course, then my face is attached to it, which might be many things. Maybe it's a constraint, maybe it means that I only say things which I only believe in very strongly, or maybe it means that I say things in a more precise manner, or try to. But if I have an image then this image is something I would basically have in one of my feeds anyway. It's screenshots, pictures on my phone, screenshots on my notebook. And this is basically, since I only have two main devices, my phone and my notebook, and I take screenshots there, then these would be the two flows in which these pictures would turn up anyway. So I'm currently thinking that I'm introducing this new format in which I then just have improvised, and I stop also writing tweets, because whenever I expose myself to writing tweets, I notice that I then am sucked into Twitter, and then I'm reading tweets of people, and then I'm reading drama tweets, and this is not something I actually want to have in my life. I would rather, instead of watching this content or reading this content, I would rather spend time creating this. But I cannot create if this is, in terms of incentive structure, basically an option. If you think about a tunnel, and this tunnel has a base, and from this tunnel now there are tunnels that lead up and down. So these are multiple tunnels. It's a tunnel system, but you are standing in one of these middle points. The tunnel that goes down is also one you can just trip over and fall down. And this is what I think Twitter is. So of course you have the three-dimensional representation of the incentive structures that then basically make you do different things, and because you physically would have to either go a certain way or even go up a certain way, and it would take more effort, you then have the representation in terms of how hard it is and how does these would also be vectors, incentive vectors, you could also say. And so when I expose myself to Twitter, there are these incentive vectors that lead downwards, and I could stumble and fall upon them and find myself somewhere below. If I don't do anything, then if I only put in the walking effort, then it leads me sideways. And if I have additional effort, then it leads me upwards. And upwards in this case would be good, down would be bad. So by exposing myself to something like Twitter for long periods of time, or having it in my workflow, it seems to be the case that the other options that lead upwards, where I have to put in effort, are just less, are just harder, because I now also have these other options, and I have to avoid basically tripping on all of these because they are holes on the floor, and I have to avoid stepping onto these and then tripping over and over and falling into these. So this is an analogy in terms of the incentive structure that this provides. Now, there also, so this would be then the visual format, or the visual screenshots documenting them would then be kind of maybe a long-term a long-term replacement for writing tweets, but also maybe writing blog posts. What I noticed also with writing blog posts is that, well, my speech doesn't develop, my talking doesn't develop, my writing might develop, but it just takes so long, and often there is latency, and then the website crashes. It's not that the website crashes this often, but I rarely find that I can type as fast as I can speak, and maybe it's a third, maybe it's a fifth of this, and I also don't have then a finished product. So once I write, I then have to make this more precise, or get out the mistakes, whereas with a video, even, of course, now there is also the standard, ideally I would make videos completely mistake-free, but I at least keep on talking, and in terms of talking, this seems also to provide some benefit in terms of other areas of my life, where I just become more proficient at talking, whereas writing might also have some benefit, but I am betting currently on talking being the more useful use of my time. I also am planning, or have been planning for a long time. I also at one point already had a show which would be a podcast format, not a podcast in format, but a podcast format, in which I would talk to somebody, mostly me being the interviewee, and then learning from interviewer and learning from the interviewee. Also, this would also allow me to maybe get to know different people of different backgrounds, maybe somebody who has published something on something that I find interesting, something on something. And, well, this is the idea of the show. So these different formats are basically flows, and sometimes they are intertwined with my real life, and usually they are kind of a derivative of my real life, and so therefore it is kind of easy in terms of the time use, but also because I already have thoughts on this, and if I change something in my workout routine, then I can talk about this, and maybe it seems to make sense, and in my eyes it's an optimization, so therefore it kind of makes sense at least to capture this, at least for future versions of myself, which in terms of audience proxy seems to be the ideal audience proxy. So this is a short, not a short, but a very long version of what I used to do in terms of tracking ideas and what currently. So the idea is that instead of putting all of these ideas down, I basically have workflow that already capture these things that are basically ideas, and therefore I don't have to put these ideas down, because this also takes time, and I have to be on a computer or notebook, and then all of these ideas have to flow to me in the right point in time, and sometimes I don't have any ideas when I would then be writing. But by cutting out this process, I can focus basically more on creating. The more of my time I can spend on the core thing, so not distribution and not the ideation, but just the creation, the more time I spend on this, the better I get at creating, because I only have a fixed amount of time, and so the proportions of this time, or the ratios of these time of these different things that basically turn something, an idea, into content, the ratios basically determine in which areas I grow stronger. If I assume that for a fixed unit of time I can actually learn to become better in this area. And so I'm trying basically to switch away from recording ideas for the sake of recording ideas, but just taking all the different flows that already are happening, and then as a function thereof also make or turn them into videos.